Well, with trade deals to be negotiated and decisions to be made over issues like the building of the 5G network, we certainly haven't even begun to hear the last of Brexit. Let's speak to the editor of Spike, Sir Brendan O'Neill, and Grace Blakeley, economics commentator at the New Statesman. A warm welcome to you both. Brendan, if I could firstly kick off with you. Interesting listening to the Home Secretary there talking about divergence. I guess what is clear is that there's still a lot to be thrashed out. We've got 11 months to do it.
Yeah, there is a lot to be thrashed out, and Brexit is by no means over. It will go on for a long time. But I think Priti Patel is absolutely right when she says that Brexit is about divergence. We are diverging from the European Union. We are wriggling free of the European Union, and we are taking back sovereign democratic control over our laws, our borders, and our money. I'm surprised that 3.5 years into this process, that remains a controversial thing to say. I think a lot of the kind of Remainers in British politics, their new word is alignment, and they want more and more increased alignment with the European Union in terms of laws and so on. And that really is just a rehash of the phrase soft Brexit. They don't really want us to leave the European Union. So I actually think we should give some kudos to the Home Secretary for reminding us that the British people voted in their millions to leave the European Union, and that actually means leaving the European Union.
Grace, does the Home Secretary have a point? There should be divergence?
Well, I mean, it's all very well saying that there needs to be divergence. I think the question is, what is that divergence going to look like? And you know, the Home Secretary was just saying we need to take back control of our laws, our borders, etc. But again, that is an option that includes potentially a variety of different ways of dealing with, say, the economy, with labour rights, with environmental issues after Brexit. And I think, you know, what we've seen from the Conservatives, and particularly the far right of the Conservative Party that really has driven this process from the start, is that there is a plan to reduce labour rights after Brexit, to reduce environmental standards, and probably to try and negotiate some sort of trade deal with the United States, which would include provisions to allow US pharmaceutical companies greater access to British markets, potentially forcing higher prices on the NHS, and also wider British healthcare US healthcare companies access to the NHS and accelerating the marketisation of the NHS. So yes, you know, I think we are at a stage where it has become obvious that there will be divergence, and that slogan of kind of take back control will be honoured. The question now is, what does our future look like after we leave the European Union? And I don't necessarily think that the Conservative Party has been all that forthcoming about how it intends to change the British economy, change our regulation, change our environmental standards as we move forward.
Brendan?
Well, I'm very surprised that Grace, who comes from the left, seems to think that the European Union gifted us our workers' rights. Workers' rights are something that I think are incredibly important. The right to strike, the right to good pay and conditions. These are incredibly important rights that were won by working-class British people over the past 2 centuries in particular, through hard struggle and through, hold on, let me finish, and through going on strike. But the great problem with, I think, the left apologism for the European Union, this notion that the European Union is a protector of workers' rights. You only have to look at Greece, which has been plunged into penury by the European Union, and the working classes there have been destroyed by the European Union, to see what a fallacy that is. You know, as Tony Benn said, the great Tony Benn, he argued that the European Union is the first institution in history, really, that has capitalism written into its constitution. So I think it's a very good thing for the workers of the United Kingdom that we are finally leaving this institution. What it allows us to do is to use our democratic rights and our vote to say what kind of rights we want the government to uphold.
Grace?
I am no, great defender of the European Union as some sort of beacon of socialism. But again, Brexit is very much done now. I think the question that we all have to be asking ourselves is, what is the governing party going to use this period to do? And I think for both those on the right and the left who advocated leaving the European Union, the aim was not simply to leave, it was also to transform the economy in a very particular way afterwards. Those on the left had a vision of perhaps a kind of post-Brexit Green New Deal that would have more allowances for state intervention, as well as kind of protecting all those rights and perhaps building on them that have been thus thus far guaranteed by the European Union and therefore protected against incursions from the Conservative Party. I think the Conservative vision of what the UK economy, society is going to look like after Brexit is very, very different to that. It is very much based on the idea of turning the UK into a tax haven off the coast of Europe, turning us into this Singapore on Thames. And that is not something that I think the Conservative Party, particularly in this election, where they won with those working class votes, particularly the north of the country, it's not something that they've been forthcoming about. And I think particularly as we start to see some economic challenges where we're going to need more state interventionism, where we're going to need stronger labour rights, that bargain is probably going to come unstuck.
Okay, Brendan, I know you want to respond to that. Can I just pick up one of the issues that we've been talking about over the last few days, this story about Huawei? Is it a bit of an indication for now of the bind that the Prime Minister is currently in? The Americans are saying that you need to walk away from this deal. At the moment, the government doesn't seem to be changing its position on Huawei, but it could possibly in the future if that trade deal with the United States is at risk.
Yes, that is possible. And I do think we have to be careful when we're striking a trade deal with the US that we don't allow the US to infringe on our sovereignty in the way that we were so concerned about the European Union doing over the past few decades. So I think the government should do what it thinks is best and not allow itself to be bossed around by the United States any more than we would want ourselves to be bossed around by the European Union. I think it's very important, and Priti Patel actually made this case pretty well, that we recover a genuine sense of sovereignty, a genuine sense of national democracy, which means that we make our decisions for ourselves in tandem with what the people want. But I just think that it's very important to recognise that the reason that the Conservative Party are spearheading Brexit, the reason they're in charge of this process, is because the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, completely and utterly abandoned the idea of Brexit. And Len McCluskey this morning has been making that very point. He's been making the point that the reason Labour lost is because the people didn't trust it, and the people didn't trust it because it went from being a Brexit respecting party in 2017 to being a very middle class metropolitan Remainer party shortly after that. So the Labour Party has destroyed its own reputation. That's why the Conservatives are in charge of what is actually a very radical vote, which is the vote to leave the European Union. So this is a complicated process, and I think Priti Patel is actually sounding more radical at the moment than someone like Jeremy Corbyn.
Grace, if it is true that the Labour Party's reputation has been destroyed as a result of Brexit, I mean, how long do you think it will take for that reputation to be restored?
Look, I don't think the party's reputation has been destroyed as a result of Brexit. Obviously, there were some strategic errors, and I do think that the decision to support a second referendum was one of those strategic errors. It was the big difference between 2017 and 2019 for the Labour Party. I think we all have to accept now that Brexit is happening. And again, I think that question comes back to how it is managed. And the point you raised about Huawei and potentially ceding a huge amount of control over our own laws and policies, etc., to the United States is a really important one, because we are going into these trade negotiations that the government seems to be so excited about as the junior partner on many, many different fronts. Now, that doesn't have to be a disadvantage. If we're willing to accept, I think, if we're willing to go through a negotiation process and have at the centre of that workers' rights and actually, as kind of linked to what Brendan was saying, actual democratic demands from ordinary working people. But actually what we're going to end up seeing is the upper echelons of government, of the state, of the civil service, and all the kind of corporate interests that surround them determining what the future of the UK looks like after Brexit, and determining what that trade deal with the United States looks like. And that is not going to be good for working people up and down this country. It's not going to be good for the environment. It's not going to be good for workers' rights, and it's not going to be good for our NHS.
Okay, Brendan O'Neill, editor of Spiked, and Grace Blakeley, economics commentator at the New Statesman. Really good to get your thoughts. Many thanks indeed for joining us this afternoon. Cheers.